Oh yeah. Two T-80s on the hunt. Nice. That's what I'm talking about. We got Alpha secure, boys and girls. Something over there. Let's see. What about over there? Nothing. Wait a minute. What's our leopard shooting at? Wait a minute! Alarm! Agon! Get the M1! Oh! Oh! I thought that was a regular M1 for a second, not an XM1. Whew, that was close. Oh, man. GG. Wow. Howdy folks, Sauber here. Welcome back to the channel. So in this video we're going to be discussing part 2 of celebrating War Thunder's 6th anniversary, and for this one I'm going to be taking out a tank that I did not take initially when it first came out. The Soviet Huntress, the T-80B, aka the T-80BV. Now, War Thunder released an interesting response in one of their Q&As to the T-80B. They're like, "Hello, Mr. Gaijin." No, I can't think of the right voice. I'll just say it normal voice. "Mr. Gaijin, why is the T-80B not called the T-80BV when the ERA package is attached?" And their response is, "It is not T-80BV. It is just a simple T-80B with ERA package. T-80BV was a completely separate vehicle." Huh. That's rather interesting. I could have swore that the T-80B became the T-80BV when it got its ERA. I don't know. You be the judge of that. But the T-80B, even without its ERA, but in this case I'm just showing the ERA, it has pretty decent protection on the hull as well as the turret against an M1 and even Leopard 2A4 rounds. But obviously there are some weak spots, and the most notable weak spot, hey kitty, is you know, the gun breech, the lower plate, and certain parts of the hull. I don't know why those parts are not protected. It's rather interesting. But yeah, it has really decent protection except against, you know, the derpy T90, oh my goodness, Type 90 with its 540 round pen. And that's another thing I wanted to highlight before we go into the little storytelling is someone else asked in that same dev blog, at least I think it was the same dev blog, why do some tanks have their best possible shells while others don't? Like the Type 90, which has the JM33, the DM23 equivalent, German DM23 equivalent, excuse me, yet the Leopard 2A4 has only DM23. This response was rather interesting. Let me know what you think about this. When including shells, we have to consider what choices are available to the machine, as many tanks of this era use similar ammunition. In general, ammunition is much more powerful. So in general, in order to preserve tactical gameplay, we try to introduce ammunition with the minimum penetration possible at top ranks. So there is still a need to target weaker zones and modules. In the case of the Type 90, specifically, it was simply the lowest shell possible. So yeah, so at least they tried to balance it out, but I guess the Type 90 just had its lowest shell possible at 540 pen. But that kind of makes me curious, did the STC, which was the testing phase of the Type 90, kind of like this XM1 here, did it have a lower pen round? Because part of the issue with some people saying, oh, we can't get the M1A1 yet, you know, the one with the 120 mils, because its shell would be ripping through everything. What about the M1E1? Because some of my sources have said that, and when I say sources, I mean friends that are knowledgeable of these vehicles, have said that the M1E1 used ammunition comparable to that of the Leopard 2A4. Now, the M1E1, in case you don't know, is kind of the, I guess you could say, the prototype of the M1A1, which was the first variant to use the M256 120mm cannon. But that's a subject for another day. In short, if we do get the M1 with the 120mm, I'm kind of willing to bet that it might be the M1E1. If the M1A1, then surely we'd get the T-80U, and maybe, just maybe, the Leopard 2A5. But anyway, let's get back to the storytelling, right where we left off. Just to recap, I was initially, when ground forces were announced to be in closed beta for War Thunder, I was a little hesitant because, as I mentioned earlier, I was a little hesitant about playing tanks because I was spread the rumor that tanks are just not that fun for those that had played World of Tanks. That just tanks in general were not fun. But, you know, to each their own. At any rate, I did the tester stars to get into the beta, and by the time I did, my PC went out, and by the time I got it fixed, the CBT had ended. So now we go to where we are now in this timeline. So when I first got into tanks, I was like, not all nations have their tanks. So I asked around and they explained that for these purposes, because tanks were brand new to the game, they were still being tested, for these purposes they were going to add 2 nations that fought each other that had the most significant tank battles in history, which, bear in mind at the time, War Thunder was mainly geared towards World War II and Korea era stuff. So, what was the biggest tank battle in history? The Battle of Kursk. Who fought in those battles? Germany and Russia. So, we got the German and Russian tech trees in the game when the ground forces were introduced. Now, I immediately was excited for both nations because I wanted my Tiger, I wanted my T-34-76 and T-34-85. So I started off with the Russian line and I loved it. And a funny thing to mention, when ground forces came out, I knew nothing about tanks, just nothing. I knew some basics. I knew what a Sherman was, or at least I thought I knew what it was. I knew obviously what an Abrams was, a T-80, a T-90, and whatnot. But, oh my goodness, I still laugh every time I just think about this. I confused the Russian T-26 light tank for a Sherman. I know what you're thinking. Really? You confused it with the Sherman? Well, hey, I know a friend of mine that confused the B-25, or let me rephrase that. He thought that that B-25s dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm like, no, that's a B-29. But nonetheless. But I just got hooked with tanks right away. Well, it was a little frustrating to get started, just as it was when I first started playing planes. Once I started learning the basics of tanks, like getting some decent tanks like the T-34s, and even the T-28s, those were fun. Now, I gotta mention a story that at the time made me mad, but now that I look back on it, it's really hilarious. So I'm playing on the Carpathians, or, oh my goodness, the excuse me, the Karelia map. And remember, because at the time I confused it with the Carpathians map, because they both started with a car. At any rate, I'm on the Karelia map, and I'm going downhill, and I hit this bump. This was like the glitch from Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, where on that snow map, if you race into that iceberg, your car goes flying up. Well, in my case, my tank sunk into the ground, fell into the void, and then went shooting up, and then just started having a seizure. It was ridiculous. Like, just to give you an idea, there's this custom tank map that you can download on Live War Thunder. I forget what it's called, but if I find it, I'll link it in the description below. But what you can do is you can drive on this highway in the sky. That's what it is. Where you can drive on this makeshift road, fall off, and if you hit the ground, you have a chance of either sinking into the void or just go shooting straight up and glitching. That's kind of what happened there, but that was because I hit a rock. But as you can tell, it was closed beta, open beta, excuse me. And tanks were a little glitchier back then. Like, my all-time favorite one, aside from that, was you could have an AI tank that was damaged, and if you'd hit it, and you can still find videos of it on YouTube, you'd hit it, and then it would just go flying through the air, just flying to space. When I first saw that, I was like, what the heck is this? I would sometimes intentionally ram either allied or enemy AI just to see him go flying. That was hilarious. And now, I'm not talking about, like now, if you're lagging, a tank goes flying, because I know my friend Engine has a couple of videos of me where my tank is just floating in the air because he's lagging. But this is when you would hit an enemy tank or an allied tank that I'm pretty sure it had to be damaged to an extent, and it would just go flying into the air at supersonic speeds. Oh, those were the days of War Thunder. But yeah, tanks, like, and here, get this, when I didn't feel like driving a tank, or if I felt like doing something different, because back then, you'll probably be shocked to know this, but back then, it was possible to take a plane before you would take a tank. Now, I know you can do this with helicopters as long as you don't take ATGMs, but back then this was a big deal. Because if you were in an open top vehicle, or if the enemy plane had bombs, then they could just spawn into a bomber and whatnot from the start and just wreak havoc on these ground units for XP and Silver Lions. And I remember well because I saw Oxide's videos on taking the ME410 Hornacy, which, it's funny, thanks to that video, I got into flying the ME410 both in regular air battles and in ground battles. It's just such an excellent heavy fighter, along with my favorite BF-110, of course. At any rate, I also took the Year 2, as was highlighted in his video, and just wreaked havoc. My biggest bomb streak with the oh my goodness, almost called it the TU2. The Year 2, you're going to be disgusted by this. 7 tanks in one bombing run. 3 1,000 kilogram bombs and 4 500 kilogram bombs. Now, 2 of my 1000s missed because I wasn't used to calculating, you know, the moving tanks. I don't know. I guess because I was trying to fly like Oxide was doing, you know, flying erratically and whatnot, but I guess that wasn't the way to go. But at any rate, my 1,000 kilogram bomb and my other 4 500s were able to just wreak havoc on these tanks. And one of those drops, a 500 kilogram bomb lighted on a cap circle and got 4 tanks. Yeah. Now the way it worked back then, it was rather interesting. In addition to the player tanks, yes, my turret just glitched, you also had some AI tanks, which I kind of missed the AI tanks, because that gave you some additional targets to shoot at. But I guess the main reason they removed them, I believe they removed them just about last year, in 2017, early 2017 rather, is because you could be in a sneaky, breaky spot, and then out of the blue, you would have an AI just start shooting at you, even though he couldn't see you, like you were behind bushes, or even behind a rock. I guess the AI just couldn't be perfected in 100% balance, but I think they should return, like, for events, for, like, large-scale battles, or even, maybe, just maybe, simulator battles. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But all in all, I really started getting into tanks around that time. And shortly afterwards, in 1.43, which tanks were released to open beta in 1.41, in 1.43 they introduced the Sky is for Heroes, which they added the spawn point system, which we all know now, which interestingly enough, has been raised for aircraft 8.0 and above. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, I thought it would apply only to aircraft that they themselves were 8.0 and above. Not if you got into a match that's 8.0 and above. Because, for example, I have a 7.7 lineup, and if I get up tier to 8.0, which that happens a lot, then chances are my aircraft are going to cost a lot more. Like, I even took an I-15 out just to experiment, and it costed 720 spawn points. I think that should be adjusted to a certain degree. Like, I kind of can't help but wonder if the spawn points should be calculated based on the aircraft's efficiency. Like, when I say efficiency, I mean, like, its loadout. Like, if it carries a lot of bombs, then it can maybe, and it's fast, maybe a higher spawn point costs. If it has a few very few bombs or rockets, and it's slow, and maybe a lower BR, I don't know, I'm just speculating at this point. But anyway, when they introduced the spawn point system, I was like, this is actually helpful. Because back then, before they introduced the spawn point system, you could... It was in a way kind of like SB is today. You would pick a tank, and, like, let's say a medium tank, and you could spawn in it 2 times. That's it. And then you also had 1 air spawn. And I remember... I made a suggestion to where you could have like 1 spawn for, or 2 spawns for a tank, 1 spawn for an AA, and then a spawn for an aircraft. Maybe 2. But then that's when they introduced the spawn point system, and my old suggestion was meaningless. Which is not a bad thing. They at least made it to where you could, if you died in your tank, no problem, you could immediately switch to either another tank or even an SPAA. So that gave you more freedom than the old system. And then that patch also introduced my favorite map in the game, which happens to be the map I'm on right now. I'm sorry, my allergies are acting up, and if I sound snarly, I apologize for that. It's just, oh man, cedar fever is miserable. Anyhow, Poland, it was the very first urban map added to the game. And I loved it. Like, being able to hide in some corners and just wait for an enemy to pop out and shoot him in the side and go, surprise! That was an experience I'll never forget. And I love urban maps. I especially like the maps that are mixed. And when I say mixed, I mean like they're mostly like plains or forests, maybe have some rivers, and then of course have their towns. Poland just, I don't know, it just combines all of that in a perfect balance. Now, I remember there was a little balance issue on the southeastern part of the map, which is, if you look on the map grid in the video, oh, that X-ray got in the way. Get out of the way, please. Which is, and those markers are in the way. Okay, here we go, which is around F6 and F7. If you've been on that map before, you'll notice those big rock masses. Just last year, they were not there. And the spawn location would, depending on what version of the map you played, was either at E7 or E8. And that made it possible that if you were wanting to... let me try it again. If you were spawning in the west and you head towards the east, you could just turkey shoot into the enemy spawn from across the map, and they could not do anything. They couldn't get into cover, they couldn't retaliate, because the age-old issue is if you're being attacked and you don't know where the enemy is you have anywhere between, literally, 5 to 12 seconds at best to, number 1, find out where the shot came from, number 2, find the enemy, wherever he may be, number 3, aim, number 4, shoot. And you have to make that shot count. And you have to do all 4 of those steps in 5 to 12 seconds. That's just not a lot of time. So I made a bug report on it. And within the next patch, which I already forgot what it was. And bear in mind, I'm kind of jumping a little. I apologize for that. This is all in late 2017 that I'm mentioning the issue with Poland. But thankfully, in 1.73, I think that was La Résistance. Or was it the French aircraft tree? At any rate, that patch, that's when they fixed the issue with Poland. And things have been a lot better ever since with the Poland map. So let's go back to 2014, 2015. I climbed through the ranks with tanks, and I'll never forget when I got the Tiger. Because I had watched a number of documentaries about the Tiger, including Greatest Tank Battles, and this one documentary, I forgot the exact title of it, but it talked about the famous tank commander, Michael Wittmann, and his Tiger tank. And when I got my Tiger tank, it's funny what I did. I downloaded from Live War Thunder a Tiger pellet skin, so my Tiger looked like a tiger. I'm playing Eye of the Tiger. I'm raging on Poland, and I get 9 tanks destroyed in my very first game with the Tiger. It was amazing. I love games like that where you get this shiny new vehicle and you just excel with it right away. But yeah, and interestingly, that was in an arcade battle, not a realistic battle. Now, the reason being is, long story short, back in the old spawn system, before it was changed just a few short months ago in 2018, any heavy tank would cost anywhere between 350 to 450 spawn points, the latter of which is the maximum amount of spawn points you start with. So if you got destroyed early on, even if you had at least 1 tank destroyed or even 1 capture point taken, it would not be enough to even spawn at an AA. Yeah, bad system then. Which is why back then a lot of heavy tanks in RB, if they didn't get a good score and they got taken out, straight back to the hangar. But thankfully now that is no longer the case. So I just enjoyed my Tiger, and I went down the Tiger line, and this is before they added the Tiger E. So I got my Tiger 2P, then my Tiger 2H. It was a ton of fun, but afterwards, that's when I guess the meta started to change, because that's when American tanks were added, and I don't know, like the Germans were kind of having difficulties back then at 6.7. So then that's when I started playing the Russians and American tanks more. And when the American tanks came out, I'll never forget it, because my friend was spending the week at my place, because his parents were on vacation. And I'll never forget it, I bought him a whole week of premium account, and that's when they also added American tanks. So we played the American tanks a lot. Like at one point we binged for like 13 hours. It was a ton of fun playing the new stuff out. I miss those days. But yeah, ground forces, and I also remember when they added the Cold War era tanks. Like when I say Cold War era tanks, I mean like the T-10M, the Leopard 1, and the M60. Like I wanted the M60. It just looked like such a cool tank. And I got it, and it was fun for a little while, despite the struggle with the Leopard Rush. And yeah, but later, the following year, in 2016, during the November sale, I got my Leopard 1, and then later the Leopard 1A1, the Leopard A1A1, and that vehicle was a ton of fun. So, yeah, so much to talk about, yet it's only so much time for the video. I might even make a part 3 that combines a little bit of the ground forces up to this day, and then a little bit with the ships. So we'll just have to wait and see what the future holds in that regard. But anyway, that is it for today's video for the time being. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. And yeah, stay tuned for the next video where I talk more about my history with the ground forces. I only covered a little bit of it because there was only so much time and there was so much to talk about in that short time frame. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Stay safe. Peace out.